society until everyone agrees. Now, isn't that an astounding fact? Think of how that would work here if we didn't make any changes in our government until all of us agreed upon it. Well, they've gotten to that point in their society now where the people actually have a say-so and affect change by having to agree on everything. One interesting thing to note here, too, is that they brought up the fact that no one on Earth is really in touch with these higher forms of intelligence, these collective consciousness. These are beings that now are so evolved that they have really very little awareness of the physical, and they don't make any contact with it. You can't force a contact with them, but it is possible to receive information from them, apparently. Okay, I see we're coming to the end of the tape, so let's fast forward this to the end, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, we're back on the other last side here, back side of tape number 4, where Ptah was just explaining to Billy a little bit how their government worked. Interesting point that when the information is filtered down from the High Council, it comes down to the planets. Interesting phenomenon where everybody has to agree before they make any changes. Can you imagine that on our own world? When that information comes down, they don't exactly vote, but everyone's informed, and no changes are made in the society until everyone agrees. Okay, we've moved along pretty much through all these areas that they're going to show Billy now. And Billy, while they were moving back, he says that they're getting ready to bring Billy back into the area around Earth. And before they do that, he had a couple other questions too. He says, Ptah, am I correct that on the planet Earth, I noticed that there are some changes in the climate and in the poles and so forth, and I noticed that there are possible effects from the atomic bomb in 1945. It looks to me like it took about 2 years for the radiation for that to move up into the atmosphere and have some effect on the weather. And Ptah says, well, that's very good that you noticed that, because most people didn't notice it for years, and the scientists still haven't figured out the actual real effect that those bombs actually had on the planet. He says the first thing that happened was that they haven't even noticed it yet, that we actually slowed down the rotation of the planet, that we're not actually rotating around the sun exactly on our 365-day cycle anymore. That got slowed down just a little, and our orbit is off just a little bit, that we actually moved the planet out of its orbit. They didn't say how much, but it may be a very small amount. But they mentioned that was one of the problems that the bombing brought on, and it did affect the magnetic poles. That if we were to be able to see ahead 1,000 years, that we would find out that the bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki had the effect of causing or stepping up a polar shift on our axis, that the poles would not roll over, but they would continue in a very slow fashion to keep moving, and that in 1,000 years' time, the North Pole would be in the area of Saudi Arabia, and the South Pole will be in South America. He says in the year 2000, actually, the North Pole will be located at a point right between some city called Deschida at the Red Sea, and I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. It's spelled D-S-C-H-I-D-D-A, right between this city and the town, the Islam town called Mecca. That's where the North Pole would be. So that was going to take a long period of time, though. There was no mention at all of any sudden polar shift or of the planet itself rolling over, but the bombs did have the effect of causing this magnetic field to move, I guess, faster than it normally would. So another problem, which they really had never made the connection, was that the atomic bombs that were dropped and exploded actually released some unusual energies, electrical energies, but not like the electrical charge that we're used to. That they are electrical radiation types of energies at very high frequencies. And these frequencies actually affected the ozone belt back in 1945. What happens is this. Normally that there's a radiation kind of like that comes from the sun, and there's this belt of ultraviolet radiation, or like an ultraviolet field that normally affects the oxygen. It hits the oxygen and creates ozone naturally. Well, the radiation that came off of those bombs at very high frequency affected that. Normally, they said that for every 500,000 parts of air, there's usually 1 part of ozone. But immediately after the explosion in Japan, when those bombs were discharged, that the ozone value increased 34 times and had 28 parts of ozone per 500,000 parts of air, which isn't significant. I mean, we certainly wouldn't notice it or anything, because ozone's main function is for the preservation of life on the planet, to protect us from the ultraviolet radiation. That's normally done naturally just by the planet itself. But they said the unusual part was, and the effect was, which our scientists have no idea about and still don't even up to this time period, is that radiation, that quick acceleration in those high frequencies, actually caused danger to small organisms. And that for a very short period of time, massive amounts of small organisms were destroyed on the planet Earth at that time. Also seemed to affect that band of energy around the planet, has something to do with them being reborn properly also. The effect of this would last for hundreds of years and throw off the normal cycle of these small organisms. Right after the explosion happened, when there was this sudden surge in the part level of the ozone, it then decreased very rapidly, and the ozone settled to a lower value than it was before the explosion. There was one other effect that explosion had. It says it caused problems in the Van Allen girdle, this Van Allen belt around the planet. This is where electrons and protons are held in by the magnetic field of the planet and infect very important life functions. Now, these particles exist at a height of about 1,000 kilometers on the average. These are particles that are charged normally by the magnetic field, and they are in constant motion. They are on a spiral course which moves from pole to pole. And this somehow, the explosions which set off these very high frequencies, somehow interfered with that and interferes with the natural life functions of these small organisms. Tied into that, which is interesting, there are currently people speaking in colleges now in 1992 talking about the problems with plankton in the ocean down off the coast of South America. The plankton, the new plankton being born in the ocean, is somehow apparently sterile, and it's not producing oxygen the way that it's supposed to. Maybe we're seeing after all these years exactly what they're talking about, that these small organisms, which plankton, by the way, is the major supplier of oxygen on the planet in the ocean, that these small organisms somehow are not being bred or born properly. And this may stem all the way back to the explosion of these bombs back in 1945. So there are problems there we really hadn't even thought about. Billy went on to ask also, since he was being afforded such great treatment here, and with all of his contacts, if there were any others like himself. And Ptah commented that currently on the planet Earth, there were 17,422 people on Earth having contacts with the Pleiadians. Now, not like Billy. Billy was the only one they were having physical contacts with. They did mention that they had 3 other people like Billy around the turn of the century, apparently 2 women and a man around the 1900s, that we were having physical contacts with. There was even a couple of the people they had physical contacts with during those times, but who chose not to come forward, who did not, they were afraid they would be branded as maniacs or whatever by all their neighbors, and they didn't want to. The 17,422 people were not aware they were having contacts. Apparently, maybe a couple of hundred of them might be. These were people who were very sensitive. But for the most part, they broadcast, I guess would be the correct word. They seem to broadcast ideas and thoughts, and feelings that are picked up by 17,000 of us, and that number is increasing all the time. Apparently, people who are open and sensitive actually pick up information. It's not always terribly accurate, but they do pick it up, and that number is increasing all the time. Many people who sense that they are actually in contact with the Pleiadians actually start feeling like they have specific tasks to perform. And this may even be the case in my own here, where I don't think I've mentioned to you, I'll sidestep here just for a second. On one of my first trips to Billy's, I was told it was quite possible that I was probably Illyrian, and that they were quite sure that felt that I had come to Earth sometime back in some several thousand years back and was part of Illyrian colonization here, and my own evolution was much older by virtue of being Illyrian, which a lot of people here on Earth are, and I was somehow compelled probably to come. Many times I've had extensive dreams, thoughts, images, and visions about Billy, other life forms, and this information. It's almost as if I've always kind of known this stuff. I really didn't even have to study it very well. It was all kind of like I was always part of it. So this may be the case with a lot of people where they've been stimulated by dreams in their subconscious and somehow feel drawn to this information, very comfortable to this information or whatever. So we are probably receiving broadcasts from the Pleiadians and are among these 17,422 people that they're talking about. By the way, none of these people, they say, are in government or in political positions. So apparently they have some control over who receives this too. Otherwise, probably somewhere in government there would be some people picking this up. So they must be a little concerned about who is actually receiving it. So it's just not random broadcasting. They also mention that the splinter group of the Pleiadians, which we're going to hear more about later on, there is a race of people called Bafath, B-A-F-A-T-H. This is a splinter group split off from the Pleiadians about 75,000 years back. They're human just the same as the Pleiadians, but the Pleiadians kind of regard them as terrorists. During a very violent war many years back, they split off, and there's hardly any of them left, but the ones that are left are here on Earth. And they are sometimes, in the Billy Meier case, referred to as the Giza intelligence. I'll tell you more about them later on, but these are a renegade group of ETs that have, and some of them live under a large cavernous area below the Giza pyramid, which is why they're called the Giza intelligence. And like the Pleiadians, they are far older, more evolved, and have very strong mental abilities. Their technical abilities aren't as strong as they used to be because they haven't grown. They've been forced to stay here on Earth, and their technology is not advanced very much, but they still have the flying beamships and are quite often seen in the sky. The reason it's brought up here is that while Ptah was explaining that 17,422 people on Earth are receiving thoughts and feelings from the Pleiadians, 723 people at that time were under the influence of the Bafath. Now, when I say influence, the Bafath are instilling thoughts and ideas into people in order for control. We'll hear more about the Bafath later on, but the Bafath primarily have tried to seize control of the planet Earth on many occasions through this mental control. They have not openly tried to take control of the planet, one for two reasons. They couldn't get by the Pleiadians. Plus, their technology is not very advanced any longer, and while they have very strong mental abilities, and they do have flying discs, these discs are susceptible even to our rockets and missiles now. We could shoot them down. That apparently their ships are quite old, they are not a very great technology, and apparently they don't have the speed or the protective screens that the Pleiadian ships do, and they can be shot down. So they've taken to trying to take over the planet through mind control, and have on many occasions controlled certain people and world leaders for certain events. They mention out of the 17,000 that two people that had had open contacts that were very legit were Daniel Fry in America and someone named Victor Schauberger, who had just passed away at that time. And they went on to comment to Billy about what a very advanced being Daniel Fry was, who a very old spirit, much like Billy himself. And they painted a picture of this man as being very understanding, very loving, very knowledgeable about creation and what's going on, and that apparently Daniel Fry is quite old now, and I don't think he's really out on the speaking trail any longer, but he is one that Ptah says is genuinely legit. Billy asked also, we have life on Earth, cities, people, and so forth. Where's the next closest planet that has human life on it like ours? Ptah remarked that it really wasn't that far away. that just 5 light years away there were several planets with human life on it.